Hello, everyone, and welcome to Transforming Sales Tax Compliance to Fuel Business Growth. This webcast is brought to you by CPA Practice Advisor Magazine and Avalara. I'm Gail Perry, Editor-in-Chief of CPA Practice Advisor. Before we get started, I'd like to explain how CPE for this webcast works. The webcast counts for 1 credit of continuing professional education. If you plan to earn CPE for attending this session, you must stay with us for at least 50 minutes. In addition, we will display 4 polling questions during the webcast. In each poll, you need to record an answer, as this is our verification that you are still watching. Later today, you'll receive an email from CPA Practice Advisor containing a link to your CPE certificate, assuming you met the qualifications for certification. Please note that we can give CPE credit for multiple people at the same location. So if there are others in your office who would like to attend this event at the same computer, please have them join you now. At the end of the event, we'll give you an opportunity to send us their names and email addresses so they too can receive CPE credit. At any time, you can enter questions in the Ask a Question box provided on your screen, and our speakers will try to get to as many questions as possible during the presentation. Questions not answered during this broadcast will be addressed by the speakers afterwards via email. If you have any difficulty answering the polling questions online, sometimes depending on the device you're using, the pop-up question thing doesn't work. So you can always post your answers to polling questions in that Ask a Question box if you have any trouble answering them in our pop-up box. Slides for this broadcast are available for download by clicking the Event Resources option at the bottom left of your screen, and then click on the PDF file that is displayed. Also, the archived version of this presentation will appear on the CPA Practice Advisor website later today or tomorrow, and that's at cpapracticeadvisor.com/webinars. We are grateful to Avalara today for making this event possible and for enabling us to offer a free CPE credit to our attendees. Today, we are joined by John Solis and Kenji Kuramoto, who will be presenting this webcast. And now we are ready to begin.
Hey, thank you very much, Gail. And today we're going to be talking about transforming sales tax compliance to fuel business growth. And again, my name is John Solis. I've been doing sales and use taxes taxes in general for about 30 years, focusing in on the tax automation piece for the past 22 or so. And I'm actually joined by
me, Kenji Kuramoto. I do not have extensive sales tax or tax experience like John does. In fact,
we welcome you though.
Yeah. Whatever the opposite of that, which is probably extremely limited, would be the right term, I guess, of sales tax knowledge. But yeah, I guess it's great to be here. What am I doing here? I would say that I'm probably like most of y'all who are here joining us, which thank you for being here. I am an accountant. I'm a firm owner. And despite my best attempts to avoid client compliance issues like sales tax, we just really couldn't. So I didn't really feel very equipped or knowledgeable enough to deal with it. And so we'll talk about, I'll kind of interject a little bit at times with how we as a firm kind of learned to look at sales tax a little differently. It was certainly something that we were a little afraid of before to deal with clients we didn't have experience in, and now how it's become a nice practice line for us. So anyway, for any of you out there feeling the same way, I'm your guy. For those that need extensive tax knowledge, John's your guy. A bit about my firm, just to give you a sense of who we are and what our team does. We're essentially a CAS practice headquartered out of Atlanta, Georgia, a little over 130 employees, most here in the U.S. We do have a tax team, but it's just income tax. It's a rather small team. We tend to focus on clients who are in the technology space, SaaS companies, software, e-commerce, some professional services. And we just celebrated our 20th year of business, which was exciting. And kind of coincidentally, we also have exactly 20 tech stack partners. And so I think as accountants and firm owners, those tech stack partners we look at them as tools of our trade. They help us do much of the work we already do more effectively and better. But also some of these tools have helped us take on work that we didn't really think we were capable of doing, which will be a little bit of kind of what we discuss here. So yeah, glad to be here.
And looking forward to the discussion. Hopefully I can teach you a thing or two about sales tax while we're chatting here too.
I hope so.
I know you're looking forward to it. So just a quick agenda here. I know we just did introductions, but we're going to talk a little bit about sales tax opportunity and trends first, kind of going in a little bit about kind of how things have changed over the years. And then right after we have that discussion, we'll talk a little bit about standardizing processes and driving efficiency inside of the sales tax realm and kind of the importance of that. And then after we have that discussion, we'll tie in how to deliver the robust sales tax services related to that, like how firms typically try to solve that problem, not necessarily knowing everything there is possibly to know about sales tax, but how to partner up with people to help with that process. And then we'll also flow into one of the premier products that we have here at Avalara, which is how to help manage those processes for things that come up all the time, which is the dreaded returns filing process associated with sales tax compliance. But before we get into all that excitement, we have our first polling question.
This is the first of 4 polling questions that we'd like to have you answer. And if you're expecting to get CPE credit, you need to send in, file an answer for this. So the question is, do you have sales tax filing automation tools currently in place? And your answer options are pretty easy. It's either yes or no. So pick which one applies to you, and then click the submit button. And
wow, just the first wave that came in, a resounding no so far, huh? Oh, give it a few minutes here.
Yeah, the no's still have it by a landslide right now.
I was about to say, wow. Okay. And I think, Gail, you're pushing this out to them, or you'll
yes,
so they'll actually see what it is.
Okay. Out to them.
Okay, no worries. Well, realistically, I think we can probably summarize this real quick here. Over 90% of the people that we're chatting with today don't have any tools in place. So lots of opportunity to have some discussions around how to make things a little easier and better for you.
For sure.
Okay, just push into the next slide. So to kind of start or go into it a little bit, we're going to start with sales tax opportunity and trends that we typically see, at firms. And before we pop into that, the universal and intensifying problem around compliance is I like to summarize it this way. It's over the years, every person, every business, every day is having to deal with sales tax compliance. It is definitely not one of those tax industries that is in the process of shrinking right now. Increasing time associated with this is something a lot of firms are dealing with. They typically haven't had to want to deal with it in the past. I know Acuity has an income tax practice. I'm sure you probably get a lot of people in the process of doing those income tax returns are bringing up the question, right?
Absolutely.
And it's like, you can certainly handle it, but like, how much time do you need to invest in it is like the question that always comes up.
Yeah.
And so, go ahead.
I was going to say that happens all the time. I would imagine that others on this call are feeling that. Again, it looked like so many were in the same boat that we were historically at Acuity, where we didn't have a process for filing sales tax returns. And again, we thought initially based on our client base was historically more services oriented, more software. And we kind of thought, hey, well, no big deal. Like, we're not really going to have to deal with sales tax. And then we had an e-commerce practice joined us, which changed things entirely. But also even before that, we started seeing questions come up. Someone who had a services-based business all of a sudden goes, oh, by the way, we added some product to the SKUs and things like this. And next thing you know, we're there even without us knowing about this initially. So yeah, I think this has crept up for most of us, just in the ordinary course of whether it's doing outsourced accounting or doing income tax work. It's hard to avoid these days, because to your point, John, this is not shrinking. This is I mean, it's kind of like, okay, wait a minute. So all these different these tax municipalities are saying they would like to find ways to collect more sales tax. Oh, interesting. Yes, that's not going to decrease. So yeah.
That's it. But say taxes never go down. And to your point, before e-commerce was in the mix as much as it is now, right? So before it was even an issue, could you do sales and use tax manually? Absolutely. And it
Sure.
starts out pretty innocently, right? They're like, hey, can you tell me what the rate is for the state of California? I love that question. I'm like,
Right.
well, there isn't really one rate in California, right? There's like a lot of rates in California where you're shipping to, right? And so you would have to like go down that research path. And if you look at the country holistically in the US, there's 13,000 sales tax jurisdictions you got to worry about. What that means is there's like 13,000 little rates. Now, can you do that manually if you've got like, one or two states that you're in? You can, but you got to ask the question, like, where do you want to focus your time, right? So that comes up quite a bit. Like I used to have to deal with the question, do I need to automate those rates? Do I need to figure out a way to get those rates in the system in an easier way? And I was always comparing against manual. But when e-commerce hit the stage and people were having to ship to locations across the US, it really changed the dynamics a little bit.
For sure.
And digging into that a little bit more, it's like, it's not just the fact that they're selling e-commerce across the US and they got to worry about the tax rate, right? There's also taxability rules. Like the one like a lot of those protein bars you can buy online, whoever's coming up with their latest new protein bar or their protein drink that they want to sell, the tax rules around that actually are really complex. And if you look at, again, countrywide, there was 85,000, almost 89 or 86,000 changes in taxability rules and updates in 2023. And again, if you got one or two states, super easy, right? But if you've got like more than that, it becomes somewhat more involved to keep up to date. And I don't know if your client, I'm assuming you're probably fielding those questions for your clients today.
Oh yeah. Yeah, for sure.
I always like to talk about this slide too, because when we talk about sales tax rates, and again, the first time I ever got this question was, and I was actually doing income taxes at the time. This was a couple of years ago. I had gotten the question like, hey, what's the income tax rate for in California? And I'm like, when you actually look at it, like you just can't answer that question without usually getting the specific address associated with that rate. This is showing like zip codes. And so this is actually showing zip codes in Colorado. And you can quickly see like the zip code boundary, for example, 80111. That's the zip code boundary, those white lines of the zip code boundary. And all those colors represent the different rates that are within inside of that single zip code. And this is how I answer the question, like, can I just use the rate file by zip code? And sometimes you can. There are a series of states that you can get away if like you're doing business in like, I'm trying to think of one now. Florida. Florida, you can do it with a zip code. Like any of the New England states, you can do it with a zip code. But once you start going into the Midwest and South, like that gets a lot more confusing to actually try to figure out what the tax rate needs to be, let alone how the item should be taxed. And that kind of comes to this question here. And what I'm trying to show here is it's important to understand the unique services your firms are going to provide to your clients and whether you want to offer basically sales tax services within inside of your CAS practice. Whenever I've looked at how sales tax services are positioned inside of firms, it usually can break it down into two different groups. There's usually the advisory side of things, which is like, hey, it's usually a tax, I always equate it to it's a tax research question, right? Someone's calling up, and this usually goes to the income tax folks, right? It's like, hey, could you help me answer this taxability rule, this taxability question, like how something's happening? And that's one side of the equation. And then the other side of the equation is like the compliance piece associated with that. And I usually think about the compliance piece as like filing the return, right? And is that kind of how Acuity handles it today, or?
That's exact. I really like this because I think as firms, as we think about rolling out services and offerings, they can get kind of complicated. There's lots of components and pieces, but we've historically always liked to break them down along these two dimensions. Are they advisory and are they compliance? They don't always fall exactly in those neat buckets,
Mm,
but I think this is not just for sales tax. We've looked across almost every offering that we provide at Acuity and looked at them across those. But I think it helps break it down into a way when you start thinking about how do we market this or deliver this? Because I think you can look at, here's a few examples. I would say pricing, right?
mm,
Typically, if you're doing advisory work, you're talking higher price, greater revenue. It's often more variably priced
mm,
versus, yeah, a compliance one may have a lower price, but often it's fixed. The scalability of advisory tends to be a little bit lower sometimes. The scalability of compliance can often scale a lot easier. And this is generalizations.
mm,
The cadence and timing on this work too, I think from advisory is most often, not
mm.
always, project based, whereas compliance can be scheduled, can be very recurring as a cadence. And so I think when you think about these things, or we think about them, they help us make decisions on team members, on staffing
Mm,
consideration, right? Who are the best folks for doing advisory work? Those tend to be a little bit more seasoned team members. Sometimes we can deploy our developing earlier team members on a little bit more of the compliance work. It
mhm,
impacts the way we price. It impacts our go-to-market strategy even. We'll talk maybe a little bit more about that. And it certainly impacts our tool sets, like which of the tools facilitate each of these. So I always advocate, whether we're talking sales tax, whether you're talking income tax, CAS services, whatever it might be, taking a look, I think, inside of there, I think firm owners and accountants can say, hey, let me think about these under those two axes of whether
mm.
is this advisory or compliance work? And you can kind of start breaking it down a little easier, thinking, okay, how would I staff it? What are the right tools I should use? Let me think about pricing considerations. And so I like the way that you describe this, because this is exactly how we approach new practice lines and new offerings, just like you've kind of laid out here, John.
Oh no, I appreciate that angle, by the way,
Yep.
too. When I think of compliance, and I started out in compliance back in, well, a long time ago. I started out in compliance, and the one thing I've learned over the years is if you do compliance as a firm, the compliance work sort of can feed the advisory work, right? Because you do the returns, and that's actually where you can see a lot of the problems occurring. Like when you're actually doing the returns, you can find out, hey, why are they not calculating taxes in a certain state, or why is the return not set up correctly, or should we be thinking about a refund opportunity in a particular state? Like a lot of that can feed off of each other too. And I typically see firms have because compliance, as you said, as compliance is typically like that monthly reoccurring thing. It's usually
Right.
managed by like a separate group, right?
Yeah.
That's set aside and dedicated to that. And like they typically don't feed that information over to, like, the larger the firms I see, the less likely they are to feed that advisory work
The
over
silos
to
occur.
the,
Yeah. Don't they?
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. For
all,
sure.
all as I always say, all good, right? Opportunities. And this is actually also a really good slide that sort of gives a sort of a different view of the same thing, the evolution of the service offerings among firms. And these established services you see at the top here, the accounting, payroll, bill payment, these are typically services that most firms, bookkeepers like to offer, right? They all want to offer the accounting. If you're offering these accounting services to your clients, you know, a lot of them don't want to also offer sales tax compliance as well. It's like a lot of the firms have been pulled into that, right? We're just trying to show like the emerging services that are coming out. We've got some other stats we're going to be pulling up here in a second, but like emerging services we're seeing right now is not, along with sales and use tax compliance, has also been HR reporting, budgeting, and also financial planning. Is that kind of what
Yeah.
you're seeing as far as like, where
That,
do you
that's
focus on your firm there?
definitely. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
definitely what we're seeing. I think all the ones you mentioned in the established services are exactly ones that we have today, and I think many other firms have. However, I do remember a point in time in that 20-year history of ours to where we weren't doing all these things. We were only doing bits and pieces of them. And so, what was once emerging has now become established, and I think those are a great representation here. at the end of 24 about where a lot of firms are. But I agree. We're starting to see, we're starting to push into a few more of these services in the emerging. How are we doing financial planning and budgeting and forecasting? Those things used to be kind of one-offs, and now through advisory, we're trying to do more of that on a more with better tools, with better processes, and with people who are trained up on the HR reporting. Yeah, we're starting to see, it's kind of like an evolution beyond payroll. That was a place where accountants usually touched a little bit on the people side, but we're definitely seeing our clients, and I'm seeing more firms get a little more progressive, saying, gosh, they're already asking us about payroll and benefits, and we're managing that. Maybe we should be thinking a little bit more fully into the HR side. Are those services we can merchants push into as well? And so I think more things that have been thought about as more complex, non-traditional tax work, like SALT and state and local taxes and such, I think are starting to emerge to where it may have just started as a very simple income tax or 1040 reporting, where now it's starting to emerge. So yeah, I think that's a good representation to look there, that we'll probably hopefully start in a couple of years, start seeing those ones that you've laid out as emerging really become much more common, and we'll move over into those established services.
Thank you for that. And if we actually kind of go into a little bit more of some surveys that were done, this is looking at like offerings that firms have, and there's a couple of surveys out there that have done this. And if you look at what accounting today has done versus the AICPA, they did some surveys, and this is a little data that goes back to 2022, but it was looking at, well, as a firm, like what percentage, like where do you fall as far as your mix of services go? Like where do they fall in here? And we were just trying to highlight some differences here. You'll notice the blues, and my blue colors don't exactly match between the two surveys, but we were just basically trying, like, you're looking at like, hey, well, sales tax compliance, like just in general, as far as firms go, 56% now have gotten into the sales tax compliance services realm, as opposed to, I can't read that number, 85% for just like sales tax returns. But where does your firm, like as far as the mix goes, where would you say how you fit in here?
I'd say very similarly, because what jumps out to me is, again, fewer firms have kind of moved into, I'd say, budgeting and forecasting. You're right, you're thinking pro forma, out future state stuff, where sometimes we're a little bit as firms reticent to get into that. I think things like bookkeeping and tax prep and financial statement prep, those we're a little more accustomed to. So that's starting to emerge, but right now is not as much in people's bundles. We see up there kind of if we're looking at the survey on the left, only 53%. And then right there after it is the sales tax piece, which is something that I think also folks have been reticent to get into. I think we'll talk a bit more about that, but I think certainly as we think about what you talked about, John, about how this has exploded and emerged and the complexity of all these different jurisdictions and how quickly the tax code is changing, it's caused some pause for people to step into those. And so I think people have been slower to move into a few of those different types of practice lines. But what that represents, though, is opportunity, since most people don't have those. And I think our respondents here who were with us mentioned that sales tax filing, only couple of people are doing it, most are not. It's a little, all new things, all right, are a little scary. Change is a little scary, but that should also represent for each of us who aren't doing it, opportunity for firm growth, for more revenues, and for additional growth for the firm. So I like seeing those, because to me, I'd say, gosh, that survey represents opportunity for where I should be thinking about where we can take our firm. But yeah, that falls very similar to how we've operated over the past couple decades.
It is just as Avalara, which traditionally has worked in the middle market space as far as firms go. We've seen firms much smaller wanting to actually get into the compliance and filing, and firms larger, like just trying to figure out how to manage it is holistically, because as you need to have people and resources available to do it, and returns are due at a certain date, as we all know, so you got to kind of think through how you want to manage it. Okay. We kind of talked about this, but just to state it, emerging sales tax services trending, what we're hearing from firms. And so at Avalara, I work with a lot of firms. I work with firms from one end of the spectrum to another. I work with the big four all the way down to the one partner firms. I shouldn't just say firms. I also work with a lot of bookkeepers as well. But we're providing, what this basically is saying is that, we're providing sales tax services as a one-off, right? And it always comes in, it's the innocent question I always like to say, hey, can you help me figure out, I'm in e-commerce now, I'm selling those candy bars or those power bars across the US. Can you help me figure out how to tax that? Do you get those questions a lot?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you just hit it. You have to figure out how to if you're going to make money at it, you got to figure out how to standardize. You got to figure out how to have the resources, because you can't just charge anything for this, right? You got to figure out how to charge and charge effectively for it.
Sure.
And you got to figure out how to deliver that in a profitable way. And if there's one thing I spend a lot of time with firms, it's how to figure out how to do this profitably.
Yeah.
It sounds like
Yeah.
you've kind of figured some of it out yourself.
Some of it, but as I look at those, what you're hearing from firms, I mean, those could have been taken right from my lips a few years ago, for sure. I mean, right? Because what do we, yes, we get the one-offs. I remember years ago having, I think it was someone had a yoga studio or something. We're kind of doing some random business. It was like, oh yeah, there's no need for, or something like this. There's no need for, it was a brick and mortar. When you come in and do yoga classes, those aren't taxable. And all of a sudden, oh, now we're selling water bottles. Oh, actually, we've been a little e-commerce store. Next thing you know, okay, this little one-off thing is starting to repeat itself. So we haven't standardized that. We didn't develop a process for that. We didn't have team members. I came out of audit. I'm an old audit guy. Most of our other team members are coming from theirs too. And we haven't figured out the profitability side. So all those reasons are very valid reasons. I think that most of us don't jump into this right away into sales tax services. And to me, I think in essence, it says it's a lack of confidence, right? We haven't done these with enough repetitions. We don't have experts on our team. We can't afford to hire for a small firm. We can't afford to hire a bunch of salt experts. Those are difficult to find and expensive to bring on board. So just don't having the confidence to deal with these. And I think that's where when working with a trusted tech stack partner is where I think you can quickly gain confidence to where it's like, okay, wait a minute. If we work with someone here and partner up, we can, get the expertise. We've got the right tool set. There are repeatable processes essentially built into the tools we use. And so it's a great way to combat, I think, some of those objections. I know a lot of those were coming from me of where, wait a minute, we've got a trusted partner we could work with here who addresses these issues. So it's, I think, very common for many firms to have this. I know we certainly did.
And to give you an example, I mean, you don't need to be a small, medium, or a large firm to have this problem. I've walked into firms I'm just going to say firms of size, and I've asked the question, like, how do you want to standardize your returns? And like, you're thinking you're talking to the right person, you're talking to the SALT group, or you're talking to the sales tax group, like whatever the group is that files, you think you got the right group. And then you find out that, oh, well, we also have this CASP service where we do bookkeeping, and like, oh, they also do these returns as well.
Right.
Or you might also actually talk to the income tax folks, because the income tax folks, they have a situation, and I ran across this at two other firms. They're like, the income tax folks, they're not busy all year, right? And they look at sometimes doing the sales tax returns as like a filler for like, for as far as billing hours go, throughout the rest of the year when they're not busy, right? And like everything is fine up until there's a problem, right, of some kind. And then you realize that, oh, well, maybe that wasn't the best resource to be doing that at that particular time.
Everything is fine until it's not, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I typically find this, like, it's usually when they're going up on one of our service offerings, they're like, you're asking everyone, like, so how many returns do you file a month? And like, that's when I find out, like, oh, well, wait a minute, we actually don't know, right? And then it becomes this whole guessing game.
This isn't something we talked about in advance, John, but I'll ask you kind of on the fly, because I'm curious to be able to take.
I'm not nervous.
Oh no! Yikes! What's your favorite color? No, just kidding. Are you seeing that? Where are people putting this SALT work? I mean, you mentioned CAS a minute ago. I've seen tax teams. When I've talked about it, I've seen a lot of different firms say, "Oh yeah, our sales tax team is over. Oh yeah, it's with the rest of our tax group over near the income tax folks, right there in that group." Or some people say, "Oh no, we just have it over in CAS." We find that are you seeing that pretty commonly? That it's not necessarily sales tax is not necessarily embedded in the same team or function?
I absolutely see it. And it's actually more on the mid-sized firms, and I'll say the lower top 400. and you go in and you ask and it's a very innocent question. I'm like, well, how many returns you file? And you quickly realize they don't know the number, because I'm talking to the SALT group, which in
Yeah.
most dedicated SALT practices focus on advisory, not compliance.
Gotcha.
If they do focus on compliance, it's usually a subgroup of like their advisory services. But if they have like a bookkeeping or a CAS practice, or like a dedicated processing center to do whatever processing for 1099s, or like any, I tend to see like they have returns they file on a regular basis. And my favorite one is, and this usually comes from the income tax group, is like they have their favorite clients, whoever they are, right? And they do their income returns for them every year, and they offer free sales tax return filing with that.
No way. Oh, wow.
During the process, right? And again, it all works just fine up until it doesn't, right? Because it's like then you're like, they're filing the sales tax return in state A, and then they realize that they should have been filing in 4 other states, but no one thought to look at that, like, or no one compared where they were filing for income tax versus where they were filing for sales tax. Like all that kind of comes up in that review process.
Interesting. Cool. Well, thanks for that.
This is all on the fly, by the way, everyone. We didn't actually talk about this ahead of time. But going in now to poll question number 2.
All right, poll question number 2 is, how many clients do you have who have sales tax obligations? And your answers could be none, some, and we define some as about 25%, many, which would be about 50%, most, which would be about 75%, all, which would be about 100%, or not applicable, and I'm not sure how that differs from none, but you can pick either none or not applicable, depending on whichever you feel is more closely aligned to your own experience. So, and while you're answering that, I'll just share one of my favorite sales tax stories. I was a state and local tax person in another life, and I ventured out of public accounting briefly and went to work as a tax manager for a company, and spent about the first 6 months there just cleaning up stuff that they had done wrong. And they had been filing, they had sales taxes all over the country. They did business in almost every state. They had been filing all of their Washington, D.C. sales and paying tax on all of it to state of Washington.
Oh. You would be
that was just one of many things I was able to discover.
You would be surprised. I'll share a quick story too, that, I was at, I went to go work for a company. I'll leave the name out. It was a spinoff. They had just started up, and I went to go work there. And the day I started, I said, okay, what's your filing process right now? It's just, that's why we hired you. That's why we brought you in, John. We wanted you to build that out. It's like, so great. When did you start calculating taxes then? Oh, well, we turned the engine on, 9 months ago. And I was like, oh. And so like, I'm quickly realizing they've been calculating taxes for like 9 months, and like no one's even like looked at registering or paying at this point, right? It was just like really bad situation. Oof. Well, it looks like the majority of people here, looks like over 63, we just changed some statistics here, but 61% or so have some concern or some obligations that they're currently working through at the moment. Just go back to
Good amount.
All right, onward.
All right.
Onward we go.
Onward, and as we say, onward and upward. Okay, now we're going to go. So we just talked to kind of about, generally speaking, the industry, but standardizing processes to drive efficiency is kind of where I'm going. Because I'm going to go back to, this can all be done manually if you want to. If you want to throw 50 people at it and do the whole thing manually, you totally can, right? The question is, does that make sense? And to flow into the conversation we were just having, as you were mentioning, it's like, you can do these all as one-off. You totally can, right? But the question is, does it make sense? And this is where we go into what we call the Avalara compliance journey. But what we're trying to do here is we're trying to show, what we were just talking about, compliance, right? Sales tax compliance as a series of steps here, 5 steps. It's like, how do you want to manage that compliance journey? And again, we have steps to managing it here. And like, just to kind of give you the steps in general, one is you generally need to know where the businesses need to collect, file, and remit taxes. That is the most, if it's not happening and it's a problem, that typically comes up when the company's trying to sell, like they're trying to do a due diligence, and like it comes up in a big way. And like that is like understanding that. And that's like, typically we call that a nexus study or like whatever. But then after you figure that out, the second step is usually registering. And that is the one-time act of figuring out, hey, I need to do business in your state. Let's go ahead and fill out the information accordingly, and let's start calculating, filing, and remitting there. Step number 3, we talk about calculating taxes. So if you know where you need to register and you've actually registered, now you have to actually start calculating taxes in that jurisdiction. Typically, I'm going to show you a little slide on this in a second here, but typically that is, your billing system, which could be Shopify, it could be QuickBooks, it could be Xero, it could be Intact, like whatever your billing system is. You generally want to hook that up to Avalara. We have different ways to hook up to that. But the whole point of that is so that you don't have to manage those tax rates manually, right? You're going to call a system, you're going to automate, you're going to calculate those taxes accordingly. Step number 4 is you're going to track and manage exempt sales, which is specifically just talking about the documentation you need to provide when your customers, like once you're registered and calculating taxes, if the customer says, don't charge me tax, you need to have a process in place to track all that information. And then last but not least, at the end of this whole process, assuming you did all the other steps beforehand correct, you need to actually now remit the tax to the jurisdictions. And this is, someone put this together for me, but it was just a nice way of putting some little bubbles together to show now Avalara has products to help you with this, to help firms do it. And I know currently you actually use some of these products today. And I'm going to go into them a little bit more, but you just want to kind of share how you actually kind of fit into this process, like how your firm actually helps with this.
Yeah, and I think that's for all firms will be different, and I think that's great. But I think it's what we appreciated about Avalara's approach was we could look at this as either carte blanche, saying, "Gosh, we need help across the board here, right? Everything from registration all the way to remitting." Or maybe taking it piecemeal, and saying, "Gosh, I think we've got a good process for over getting registrations done, or for remittance." We like the full approach. Like, let's just get as much help as possible. But I think that's important in this day and age for a lot of us firms because we might have a few folks helping, whether it's in our CAS practice or our tax team that can help with certain components of this. There may be some growth opportunities, or maybe some ways it's just easier for us to do. But I like that the fact that the tool set is integrated and works such that, like, all right, let's just go ahead and knock it all out, or let's use it piecemeal. We've chosen to kind of say, let's just get all the help we can get from Avalara. But we always like that optionality where we can say, hey, gosh, let's maybe think about a different way. If we were to find, for some reason, a way that maybe something was a little bit simpler for us running the calculations separately or doing it elsewhere. But now we're kind of like, we like to be soup to nuts with y'all. Y'all have been so helpful for us. So, but I think depending on the firm, depending on who the firm is, you may not have all these needs to the same effect in the same way. So it's nice that you can have that choice.
Oh yeah, no, I appreciate that. And the reason why I like to show it this way, by the way, is when you get to step 5, this is usually when the clients come into you like, hey, look, I need help filing this return.
Right.
And I show it as the end of the process because it is truly the end, right? You have the tax amounts at that point and you're just paying it out. But that is generally where you find all the problems, because that is usually when you're looking at their sales, you're looking where they're filing, and like you're all coming back to the beginning of the process. You're like, well, why do you have $1 million worth of sales in Washington State and you're not registered there? Can you help me understand? Right. And that is truly where it all comes up. And like, again, a lot of firms, you might have a practice that is like super comfortable filing returns. That is all they want to do. But you know what? It's easy to figure out, ooh, we actually, there's some registration issues or there's some nexus issues. Avalara certainly has tools to help with this, and we have tools that we can work with your client directly with, or we can work through you with. And most firms want us to work through the firm once Avalara works with the firm. But we can actually work with you to help you register. We can help you figure out how to calculate all that stuff, and we can also help you file returns. But all that stuff we can work through each other to kind of bounce information off of each other and help each other out. And that's why I kind of like to show this slide. It kind of gives it a little bit more of a visual. It also says a lot of these keywords that a lot of firms know. So you can think about using AvaTax, like the clients, let's say the client's registered. You probably have, let's say you have 10 clients that are registered to calculate taxes. They're shipping e-commerce sales across the US. They have lots of tax rates and product taxability rules they got to worry about. Do you want to answer all those questions? Or would you rather help them implement a tax solution to help them calculate taxes with Xero or Shopify, like whatever it is, right? Wouldn't you rather put the solution in place to help them with that? And by the way, once you get that solution in place, we actually have some other solutions that'll help you centralize their filing process, right? So not only can you help them file the returns, which is typically what they're coming to you for, can you help us file the return? But you can actually help build in all the components that they need to make sure they're calculating the tax correctly before they file. To say it differently, you can offer compliance services, but you can also pull in a lot of the advisory side of the business while you're working with that client to give an end-to-end solution. Typically, on this managed returns for accountant side, this is usually where the firm sits. Usually they have multiple clients hooked up. So if they have like 10 clients they file returns for, they'll have 10 different AvaTax systems running, all centralized into one returns processing system so that they can go ahead and utilize that to manage the filing process while also dealing with their other tax needs, I guess, with the rest of the clients directly. Sales tax return and filing prep, which is usually where I like to focus the conversation a little bit next, because again, a lot of clients come to you and they're like, hey, look, I don't have the people, or I don't have the time, or I don't have the resources in place to make sure that these returns get done every month. And that's why a lot of people turn to firms to help them with sales tax return preparation and filing. This kind of walks through a little bit of the process. I'll go back to, again, this can totally be done manually, right? If your client comes to you with a big spreadsheet or a big report and you want to log in online somewhere and key all the numbers in, you can totally do that, right? Does that make the most sense? Or would it make more sense to say, hey, could you give us your data? Could you send us over what your data is? We'll take your data, we'll bring that in, we'll standardize that process, we'll make it a competitive monthly, quarterly, however often the returns are filed. We'll bring that in and we'll make that into a standardized process for you, and we'll make sure those returns get filed. Not only am I going to do that, but because me as a firm, I might not understand all the intricacies of how to file in each state, I'll outsource that process to Avalara. I'll let Avalara worry about, hey, you know what? You log into the state, you file it. I don't want to worry about it. I'm just going to worry about making sure the client gets all their data into the system, and I'm going to reconcile it against their general ledger, right? They might have sales coming from Shopify, QuickBooks, whatever their other flavor of e-commerce system they're selling through, Walmart.com, like wherever they're selling. But me as a firm, like you're probably responsible to reconcile their GL. Like when you reconcile, you just want to reconcile and make sure that not only are they posting everything correctly in the GL, but that tax information is posted to Avalara correctly too. And we have all kinds of tools to help with that. But you want to make sure those two things reconcile and tie in correctly. And then once that's done, now we have a scalable process we've built. Now, all I'm worried about is getting that data file from the client. I need to get it on a regular basis. I need to get it within the first 10 days of the month normally, but I have a process in place. And now I, as a firm, can scale without adding a lot of headcounts to get returns filed. And I have access to all their data to review if they have other compliance or advisory services things that need to happen in order to assist the client further. Now, I know you use MRA in your process today. I didn't know, is that kind of how you use it, or do you have any suggestions for the audience here?
You nailed it. That's exactly how we use it. So my suggestion to the audience would be do just like John said.
Okay.
No,
It's all about me.
No, it's all about you. No, I think that is that's a great efficient path for, I think, getting returns out, is using the MRA product. It has been a great one. So yeah, I would highly recommend it, because it does come back to, does it make sense? Like, you absolutely can do these things manually, but I can even remember, and I joked a bit earlier about, like, I don't know anything about sales tax, but I do remember when I was serving clients, like occasionally going in and trying to find logins and credentials with clients of, like, to that particular municipality's sales tax site and getting the filing done. Then you got to jump over somewhere else. I mean, the inefficiency, and you start thinking through that, can get really high pretty quick. Even if you're like, oh, I don't mind logging into a couple of websites. When you start thinking about that at scale across a client base, or repeatedly monthly, depending on how often that filing is, you kind of go, gosh, there's a lot of kind of leakage of unproductive, unvalued time that, we'd rather spend that time advising, working with the client in a more meaningful way, versus the hopping in and out of systems filing. And so I don't think it takes too long for folks to kind of go do the math on that and go, you know what, maybe we should do this in using MRA or a managed tool like this. So that's the direction we've chosen.
Awesome. And just from a time perspective, I'm going to just go to the next slide here, and we're going to go to poll question number 3.
This is our third poll question. Remember, you need to answer at least 3 questions in order to qualify for CPE credit. So this is your third chance. In your 2025 planning, is sales tax on your list to discuss with clients? And your options are yes, no, or I don't know. So pick the one most likely to apply to your business and then click submit.
Oh, wow. Okay. Interesting stats. We're split between, okay. I get a kick out of you get the stuff in real time as it's being done.
It is, yeah.
Looks like the yeses are going over 50%. Okay. Good to know. Good to know. Yes, no, or I don't know. All right. So looks like about 54% are on the yes side. Oh,
Most people are planning to, yeah.
Yeah. I should pause here for a second here. See what we Alrighty. Well, it looks like we're at the almost 54% of the folks online here plan on having the conversation. We've got some they don't know yet, and of course we've got the no's if they're in an industry that just doesn't have sales tax.
Yeah, it makes so much sense though to at least have the conversation.
Sure. Yeah.
All right. Let me go back to the slides here, and we might have already covered some of this here in the presentation here, but how to deliver robust sales tax compliance services. Now, a lot of us kind of talked about that. I kind of gave you we actually both gave you kind of our opinions around that. But it all comes back to here about building your service line. And the reason why, again, I like to show this slide is what we're trying to show here, and wow, the font's a little off there, huh? Well, what I'm trying to show here is like there's components associated with the end-to-end compliance as we were talking about. But you know what? You need to figure out if you have the services, people, process, technology, and go-to-market strategy in place in order to be able to deliver this service. And most firms, unless you're huge, most firms don't actually want to invest in all those processes, which is why the technology part or arm comes up quite a bit, because a lot of technology is out there that can help automate a lot of this stuff. And we just talked about returns filing, but there's technology in place to automate registrations, believe it or not. There's technology in place to help with research. A lot of you probably have some. We have a research engine specific to sales and use taxes you can use. There's lots of different pieces you can do, but just having the technology in place isn't a guarantee, right? You need to have the processes in place around it. And I'm going to give an example here of it, but just in case we run out of time, is there anything you wanted to add here, Kenji?
I just add that as I look at this and I see this full, like, yes, you can see end to end what looks like, oh, this nice go-to-market strategy. You got a service line. This represents what a service line looks like, right? We should all have these, we hope.
Yeah.
But I guess it reminds me of where we started in this of initially things start as a one-off. And we all do them. We all have these one-offs. We talked about them at the top of this. And
We're going to
I
try
think
it out,
sometimes,
right?
right, we're going to try it out. We'll often
Uh-huh.
beat ourselves up about like, oh, these one-offs. But I don't think we should always feel that bad about one-offs. One-offs essentially are, it's almost like customer discovery. We're doing an experiment. A client has asked us for help with something, right? And we're agreeing to try to help. It's kind of the essence of what customer service is. And it's really why all of us are in the profession, to serve customers. Now, so learning and experimenting, finding people or tools, that's fine. Where we should question ourselves if it's a continual one-off, where right we don't go about the building aspect, to John's point of either finding a tool if we're not going to do it manually. Because once you do that, I think that's exciting. And if you get that done to where you've got a full, you run a few experiments, you take a few customer one-offs, and you start creating the processes and the people and the technology that ultimately allows you to not only have the confidence that, hey, if this comes up again from a client, not only do we feel confident we can address it, like we should actually build a go-to-market strategy on this. We should go proactively, go show that we're not going to wait and hope that a client, maybe if a client asks us, we can do it. Let's go out and market this thing. Let's go put it up on the website. Let's go talk about it in proactive conversations with clients. And so I think one-offs always start as these, oh, yikes, this could be a disaster. This could go wrong. And when done well and partnered well, they can really lead to what this end result looks like, is a nice fully fleshed out service line that does have a go-to-market strategy where you are confident in saying, gosh, we can go out here and provide more value to our clients. So I think it is a good differentiator that does start with experimentation, but hopefully ultimately lands most folks with a service line looking like this.
Yeah, no, awesome. I appreciate that angle. The example I like to give too sometimes is like, if you sell, for example, if you resell Intact, for example, or QuickBooks, and you put your client on QuickBooks, if you know they have sales tax issues, you might want to, if you're implementing them on QuickBooks, you might want to also think about making sure they're hooked up correctly to calculate taxes correctly. If you're hooking them up to file returns, well, you might want to ask the question like, well, how do you get that tax data that I'm filing? Like, is it correct? How correct is it? And then leverage the tools that are available to you to figure out the best way to handle it. The reason why I kind of said all that is there are some best practices that we'd like to talk about that you should be following. And the reason why we're asking those questions early about sales taxes is, you do definitely take the time and the energy behind it, say, bring up sales taxes with every client. If they're in the yoga class, I didn't even think about yoga as an example, by the way, but like, you would think, like, if you had talked to me before, but after just listening to you talk about it, I'm like, well, you're right. If I'm selling water bottles, that could be a thing, right? But what if I'm offering online yoga classes?
Yeah.
What if there's like all sorts of things, there's ways taxes can get really intertwined in there. The ultimate reason we're all talking to you today is we want you to be able to say yes to the work and help. And if you aren't sure about it, how to help and leverage technology in order to say yes to your clients. With that is setting expectations regarding those services you're providing, which ones you will provide for the end-to-end compliance, which ones you won't, and where you might be leveraging technology to help. because some of you might be handling this as one-offs, that scope creep definitely comes up here. Like, be specific on what you're doing. If you're just filing the returns, don't offer to do all the tax research if you're not sure about it. Define with the firm and the client the responsibilities. A lot of this does come up with returns filing. Hey, me as a firm, I'm going to file the returns for you. But if you don't give me your tax information in a timely and way that I can use it to file the returns, then automation is not going to help you, right? Last but not least, I'm going to harp on this for just a hot second here. Bill for those services. I know this sounds really obvious. I'm talking to a bunch of firms about it, but you would be surprised how often it comes up that they're like, hey, I just threw it in for free, or like, whatever. I'm like, why? Track it, productize it, bill for it.
Amen.
Amen. Poll question number 4.
All right, everybody, this is your last chance to get at least 3 poll questions answered. Sorry, I've been on the phone for 6 hours.
It's all right.
Okay, would you like to learn more from today's speakers? And your answer options are Avalara, Acuity, both Avalara and Acuity, or no thank you. So click, there's really only one right answer, and it's both Avalara and Acuity. But no, you can click whichever one you want, and then click submit, and back to you guys.
Okay. No worries. I appreciate that. And the reason why we have both Acuity and Avalara there, because Acuity is like, you might be in a situation where maybe you don't want to do advisory and like you are filing the returns, right? And you want to partner with somebody to help with that. That comes up a lot and more than you know. Or you're working with a firm and you're filing returns and you want help figuring out how to automate, a tax engine, or like you don't want to do that, but you want to have someone who's not going to take business from you in the future. So you tend to build relationships with a lot of different firms around that.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, hey, just switching to the last slide here. Is there anything else you wanted to add here as we come to the question and answer and conclusion section?
No, let's jump to that and see if we've got anything from folks.
I don't.
It looks like all of the questions that came in were answered individually.
Okay, I see it. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you,
I have one more question for you, John.
Okay. Uh-oh.
Can you, again, it's just going to be a tough one. Have I heard this correctly about sales tax differences for a bagel in New York? Is this can you please describe if there's different sales tax considerations for the treatment of a sliced or unsliced bagel? Is this true or false?
That is a common question, and yes. So it's food. So whenever you talk about food, you're always trying to figure out if it's food for immediate consumption, or if it is food that is going to be purchased at like a grocery store, right? And the reason why they separate those two out is they say, hey, if the bagel's cut, we're preparing it for someone to sit down and eat, so we're probably going to want to tax it. If it's not cut, well, it must be for purchase to take home and eat, so we don't want to tax that. But yeah, it does. That definitely comes up quite a bit.
I'm going to remember that on my next trip to New York, and because I am an accountant, I'm a little cheap at things sometimes. I'm going to make sure my bagel's not cut. I want to save a little bit.
I've actually done sales inside. I've gone to Walmart. There was one point, I used to work with Walmart a lot. There was one point I went into the store, and I think it was a tax holiday for hurricane supplies when I lived in Florida, and they had it wrong, so I highlighted it and sent it back to them.
Hey. There you go. All right.
All right.
Well, hey, thank you, everyone. I just brought up the slide here. If you do want some additional information, or if you have questions, or just want to rap about the exciting world of taxes, let me know. We're more than happy to chat with you.
Yeah. And like I said, John's the best one on taxes. I love connecting with other fellow firm owners and accountants. So if there's anything I can ever help any of you all out there who are fellow firm owners, always feel free to reach out.
Well, thank you, John and Kenji, for an excellent presentation. It was a lot of fun and we learned a lot. We hope you all enjoyed this webinar. You can find all of our webinars at cpapracticeadvisor.com/webinars, and the archived version of this one will be added to that group. Thank you all for attending today's webinar and spending your time with us. And we'd like to thank Avalara for making this event possible and enabling us to offer a free CPE credit to each attendee. We'd also like to take just one moment to mention that if you haven't thought about it yet, next week is the annual free CPE marathon at CPA Practice Advisor. It's called Ensuring Success, and you can find out all about it at ensuringsuccess.com. You can register for free. It's 2 days of incredible CPE, and Avalara will be there sponsoring a session on how to add business license management services to your practice. So if you're going to add sales tax, you might as well add business management licenses too. Just get it all in there. Or business license management, sorry. Okay, so we're going to put up a form on the screen real quickly, which is an evaluation form. We'd appreciate you taking a moment just to fill that out so that we can continue to improve our webinar series. Remember, you'll receive your CPE certificate in your email box later this afternoon. If you have any questions about CPE, you can contact me at gperry, G-P-E-R-R-Y, at cpapracticeadvisor.com. And if there's someone else watching with you who needs CPE credit, send me their email address and name, and we'll get that done. It's gperry, cpapracticeadvisor.com. Our audio will end now. Thanks, everybody.